In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where rows of houses stood neatly lined up like soldiers, there was one thing that set this place apart from any other: a magnificent oak tree. It wasn't just any tree. It was a towering giant with branches that stretched wide and strong, casting shade over half the street on hot summer days. This oak had stood tall for over 2 centuries, watching generations come and go. Its roots ran deep, both in the ground and in the hearts of those who lived nearby. Emma Carter, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s, had grown up under the shadow of this ancient oak. Her family had lived in the same house since her great-great-grandfather first settled there back in 1823. He had planted the tiny sapling as a symbol of hope and new beginnings after moving west to start a life. Over time, the little sapling grew into a colossal tree, becoming part of every family story. Weddings were celebrated beneath its branches, children climbed its sturdy limbs, and picnics were held at its base during lazy summer afternoons. For Emma, the oak wasn't just a tree. It was history, memory, and home all rolled into one. But lately, trouble had been brewing. The Homeowners Association, HOA, a group responsible for maintaining order in the neighborhood, had started making noise about the tree. At first, it was small complaints. Someone tripped on a raised sidewalk near the oak's roots, or a branch fell during a storm. But soon, these minor issues turned into something much bigger. The HOA claimed the tree was a safety hazard. They argued that its sprawling roots were damaging sidewalks and driveways, while its massive branches could potentially fall and hurt someone. For Emma, hearing such talk felt like a punch to the gut. How could anyone see this majestic tree as dangerous? To her, it was anything but. She knew how many people loved it, not just her family but also neighbors who often stopped by to admire its beauty or sit under its shade. One elderly neighbor even called it her thinking spot, saying she came here whenever she needed clarity. Children played around it, birds nested in its branches, and squirrels campered up and down its trunk. It brought life to the entire block. Still, the HOA didn't seem to care. Led by Richard Langley, a stern man known for his strict adherence to rules, the board began pushing harder to have the tree removed. They sent letters to homeowners, warning them of potential liabilities if the tree stayed. Some residents agreed with the HOA, citing concerns about property damage. Others, however, were fiercely protective of the oak. Debates broke out during neighborhood meetings, dividing what had once been a peaceful community. Despite the growing tension, Emma refused to give up without a fight. After all, this tree wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever cherished it. As she sat beneath its broad canopy one evening, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze, she made a silent promise. No matter what happened, she wouldn't let them take it away without a battle. Little did she know, this decision would spark a chain of events that would change the neighborhood forever. The day Emma received the letter, her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The envelope bore the official logo of the Homeowners Association, a stark reminder of the power they held over the neighborhood. Her heart sank as she read the words. Due to safety concerns and potential liability risks, the oak tree located at 1428 Maple Lane will be removed within 30 days. 30 days. That was all the time she had left with the tree that had stood for over 200 years. Emma felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could they do this? She knew the HOA had been discussing the tree for months, but she never imagined they'd actually go through with cutting it down. Determined to stop them, Emma sprang into action. She spent hours gathering signatures from neighbors who loved the tree, creating petitions that highlighted its historical significance. Some residents eagerly added their names, sharing stories of how much the oak meant to them. Others hesitated, afraid of going against the HOA's authority. Still, Emma managed to collect dozens of signatures, enough to show that the community wasn't unanimously behind the decision. Her next step was to consult an arborist, a tree expert who could assess the health of the oak and confirm whether it truly posed a danger. The arborist arrived on a sunny afternoon, his tools clinking softly as he examined the massive trunk and sprawling branches. After a thorough inspection, he delivered good news. The tree was healthy and structurally sound. Its roots, while extensive, weren't causing significant damage to sidewalks or foundations. Armed with this report, Emma felt a surge of hope. Surely, the HOA would reconsider once they saw the evidence. But when Emma presented her case at the next HOA meeting, she was met with cold indifference. Richard Langley, the president of the board, barely glanced at the petition or the arborist's report. He sat stiffly at the head of the table, flanked by other board members who nodded along as he spoke. "Miss Carter," he said in a tone that bordered on condescending, "we appreciate your efforts, but the safety of our residents must come first. Rules are rules." Emma tried to argue, her voice rising slightly as she pleaded her case. "This tree is part of our history," she said, looking around the room. "It's not just wood and leaves. It's memories, traditions, and life itself. Can't you see that?" But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. One by one, the board members voted in favor of removing the tree. By the end of the meeting, the verdict was final. The oak would be cut down. In the weeks that followed, Emma watched helplessly as workers surrounded the tree with caution tape. Heavy machinery rumbled onto the scene, and chainsaws buzzed ominously in the air. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, some crying quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. When the first branch fell to the ground with a sickening crack, Emma turned away, unable to watch. Her chest tightened as the sound of destruction echoed through the neighborhood. Piece by piece, the mighty oak came crashing down, reduced to a pile of splintered wood and sawdust. For days afterward, the empty space where the tree once stood felt like a gaping wound. Without its shade, the street seemed harsher, brighter, and somehow emptier. Birds no longer chirped in its branches, and children avoided the area altogether. The loss weighed heavily on everyone, but for Emma, it was personal. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and standing up against those who wielded power without considering the consequences. As she stared at the barren patch of earth, a quiet resolve began to take root within her. They might have taken the tree, but they hadn't broken her spirit. If anything, they had awakened something inside her, a determination to fight back. The days following the tree's removal were some of the darkest Emma had ever faced. She felt a deep ache in her chest every time she passed the empty space where the oak once stood. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger, frustration, and disbelief all rolled into one. How could they have done this? The question replayed in her mind like a broken record. They hadn't just cut down a tree. They had erased history, dismissed emotions, and trampled on the community's trust. But as much as it hurt, Emma refused to let herself sink into despair. Instead, something inside her shifted. A quiet but unshakable resolve began to grow. Emma started spending long nights at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, books, and her laptop. She pored over every document related to the HOA, their rules, their financial records, and even old meeting minutes. At first, she didn't know exactly what she was looking for. All she knew was that she wanted answers. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. The HOA operated less like a democratic organization and more like a small dictatorship. Decisions were made behind closed doors without input from homeowners, and there were whispers of questionable spending habits. One contractor charged exorbitant fees for minor repairs, while another project mysteriously went over budget despite being unfinished. As Emma dug deeper, she uncovered something even more surprising. The HOA relied heavily on membership dues to stay afloat. Without those monthly payments from residents, they wouldn't have enough money to maintain common areas or pay for basic services. This realization sparked an idea so bold that it made her heart race. What if she could hit them where it hurt most? What if she could turn their own system against them? Emma decided to take action, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to Marcus Reed, a local attorney known for taking on tough cases against powerful organizations. Marcus was skeptical at first, raising an eyebrow when Emma explained her plan. "You're going after the HOA?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "That's not easy, Emma. These groups are well-funded and fight dirty." But Emma didn't flinch. She laid out everything she'd discovered, showing him how the HOA had violated rules and ignored homeowner rights. By the end of their meeting, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "All right," he said with a small smile. "Let's see what we can do." With Marcus on board, Emma began crafting her strategy. Phase 1 involved filing a lawsuit, not just for herself, but for all the neighbors who opposed the tree's removal. Using the information she'd gathered, they argued that the HOA had acted illegally by cutting down the oak without proper consent. The law stated that any major decision affecting private property required unanimous agreement from affected homeowners. Since not everyone supported the removal, the HOA's actions were technically invalid. But Emma didn't stop there. She also launched Phase 2, exposing the HOA's mismanagement to the entire neighborhood. She created flyers detailing years of questionable decisions and inflated costs, leaving them on doorsteps and posting them online. Within days, whispers of discontent spread like wildfire. Homeowners who had previously stayed silent now voiced their frustrations, questioning why they were paying so much for so little in return. Trust in the HOA plummeted, and soon, people began withholding their monthly dues in protest. Every step Emma took was calculated, driven by a mix of justice and determination. She wasn't acting out of revenge. This wasn't about making the HOA suffer simply because they'd hurt her. It was about holding them accountable for their actions and protecting the rights of ordinary homeowners. As she worked tirelessly, fueled by late-night coffee and sheer willpower, Emma allowed herself a small smile. They might have taken her tree, but she was planting seeds of change that would grow far beyond anything they could imagine. Emma's journey into the legal world was both daunting and eye-opening. With Marcus Reed by her side, she dove headfirst into the labyrinth of laws and regulations that governed homeowners associations. At first, the sheer complexity of it all felt overwhelming. Legal jargon filled pages of documents, and Emma often found herself rereading sentences just to make sense of them. But as Marcus patiently explained each clause and loophole, a clear path began to emerge, one that could bring the HOA to its knees. The key lay in a small but powerful detail buried deep within the HOA's covenants. Any major decision affecting private property required unanimous consent from all affected homeowners. This rule was meant to ensure fairness and prevent unilateral actions, but over the years, it had been conveniently ignored or overlooked by the board. When the HOA decided to cut down Emma's oak tree, they hadn't even attempted to seek full approval. They assumed their authority was absolute, a mistake that would now come back to haunt them. Armed with this knowledge, Emma and Marcus filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA on behalf of not only Emma, but also other residents who opposed the tree's removal. The case argued two main points. First, that the HOA had violated state property laws by destroying a historic tree without proper authorization. Second, that the HOA's leadership had consistently disregarded homeowner rights for years. To support their claims, Emma presented evidence ranging from expert arborist reports proving the tree's health to signed petitions showing widespread community opposition. News of the lawsuit spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents were hesitant at first, worried about potential backlash from the HOA. But as details of the case unfolded, more people rallied behind Emma. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, shared how the HOA had fined her unfairly for painting her front door a color outside their approved palette. Another, Mr. Thompson, revealed he'd been pressured into paying inflated fees for roof repairs handled by an HOA-approved contractor. These stories painted a picture of systemic abuse, turning Emma's fight into something much bigger than one tree. It became a battle for justice. As the lawsuit gained traction, media outlets picked up the story. Local newspapers ran articles detailing the controversy, while social media buzzed with debates about homeowner rights versus HOA power. People across the town, and even neighboring communities, began sharing their own experiences with similar organizations. For many, Emma's courage inspired them to speak out against injustices they had silently endured for years. She became an accidental symbol of resistance, a voice for those who felt powerless. Meanwhile, Richard Langley and the HOA scrambled to respond. They issued public statements defending their actions, claiming the tree posed a legitimate safety risk, and insisting they followed protocol. However, cracks in their facade started to show. Internal emails obtained during the discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed heated arguments among board members about cutting corners to save money. There were also receipts showing exorbitant spending on unnecessary projects, further fueling accusations of mismanagement. The courtroom drama intensified as hearings began. Lawyers on both sides sparred fiercely, presenting arguments and counterarguments. Emma attended every session, sitting quietly in the front row with her hands clasped tightly together. Though she tried to remain calm, her heart raced each time new evidence was introduced. It was surreal to hear lawyers debate the fate of something so personal, the towering oak that had once shaded her childhood summers. Despite the tension, Emma never lost sight of why she was fighting. This wasn't just about punishing the HOA or reclaiming financial losses. It was about setting a precedent, showing others that no matter how powerful an organization seemed, accountability mattered. If they won, it wouldn't just be a victory for her family or her neighborhood. It would send a message to HOAs everywhere that they couldn't trample over people's rights without consequences. As the trial progressed, Emma allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: the seeds of change had been planted. Whatever happened next, the HOA would never see her, or anyone else, they'd wronged, the same way again. As the lawsuit unfolded, Emma realized that taking on the HOA required more than just legal action. It needed a full-scale campaign to dismantle their power. The financial strain on the HOA began almost immediately after she exposed their mismanagement. Flyers detailing years of questionable spending and inflated contractor fees spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once paid their monthly dues without question now hesitated, scrutinizing every penny they were asked to contribute. Within weeks, a growing number of homeowners started withholding their payments altogether. The impact was swift and severe. Without the steady flow of membership dues, the HOA's finances began to crumble. Common areas that relied on these funds quickly fell into disrepair. Parks that were once manicured and vibrant became overgrown with weeds. Streetlights flickered and eventually went dark, leaving stretches of the neighborhood poorly lit at night. Even the community pool, a source of pride for many residents, was left murky and neglected due to lack of maintenance. Complaints poured in from homeowners who felt abandoned by the very organization meant to serve them. Richard Langley, desperate to regain control, called emergency meetings to address the crisis. He pleaded with residents to resume paying their dues, promising reforms and transparency moving forward. But his words rang hollow. Trust had been shattered, and few believed him. At one particularly heated meeting, a homeowner stood up and demanded answers about why certain contractors received preferential treatment while others were ignored. Another pointed out how repairs billed at exorbitant rates often remained incomplete. Richard stammered through his responses, unable to provide satisfactory explanations. His authority, once unchallenged, was crumbling before his eyes. Emma seized the opportunity to amplify her message. She created a private Facebook group where neighbors could share grievances and organize collective action. What started as a small forum grew into a thriving online community with hundreds of members. People posted photos of broken sidewalks, leaking roofs, and unkempt green spaces, all evidence of the HOA's neglect. Others shared tips on how to legally withhold dues until meaningful changes were made. The group became a hub of empowerment, giving voice to those who had long felt silenced. Meanwhile, the mounting legal fees further crippled the HOA's budget. Every court appearance, every motion filed, and every document reviewed added to their financial burden. Lawyers' bills piled up, draining what little reserve funds they had left. Desperate to cut costs, the board slashed services even further, alienating more residents in the process. It was a vicious cycle. Less money meant worse conditions, which led to fewer people willing to pay, which in turn worsened the situation. Emma watched it all unfold with a mix of satisfaction and sadness, while part of her felt vindicated seeing the HOA struggle under the weight of its own mismanagement. Another part grieved for the neighborhood she loved. The once pristine streets now bore the scars of neglect, and families who had cherished this place were losing faith in it. Still, she reminded herself that this pain was temporary, a necessary step toward rebuilding something better. Behind the scenes, Emma worked tirelessly to keep morale high among her neighbors. She organized cleanup days, rallying volunteers to mow lawns, trim bushes, and pick up trash in common areas. These efforts weren't just practical. They were symbolic. They showed everyone that the community didn't need the HOA to thrive. They could take care of themselves. Slowly but surely, a sense of unity began to emerge. People who had barely spoken to each other before now worked side by side, united by a shared goal of reclaiming their neighborhood. By the time winter rolled around, the HOA was teetering on the edge of collapse. Their bank accounts were nearly empty, their reputation in tatters, and their ability to enforce rules all but gone. For Emma, this wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was proof that ordinary people could stand up to those who abused their power. And though the battle wasn't over yet, she could already see glimpses of hope breaking through the cracks of destruction. The roots of change, planted firmly in the soil of justice, were beginning to grow. The courtroom was tense on the day of the final verdict. Rows of chairs were filled with anxious residents, some clutching hands nervously, others whispering quietly among themselves. Emma sat in the front row, her back straight, and her expression calm, though inside she felt a storm of emotion swirling. Months of preparation, late nights, and relentless effort had led to this moment. She glanced at Marcus Reed, who gave her a reassuring nod before turning his attention back to the judge. When the judge finally spoke, his words carried the weight of authority, but also clarity. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he began, pausing briefly as everyone leaned forward in anticipation. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The HOA had acted illegally by removing the oak tree without unanimous consent, violating both state property laws and homeowner rights. The ruling wasn't just symbolic. It came with consequences. The HOA was ordered to pay substantial damages to Emma and the other plaintiffs, compensation for the loss of the historic tree and years of mismanagement. But the judge didn't stop there. He mandated sweeping reforms within the HOA, including transparent financial practices, regular audits, and mandatory homeowner approval for major decisions. Perhaps most significantly, he ruled that any future actions affecting private property required clear communication and consent from all affected parties. It was a landmark decision, one that set a precedent not only for their neighborhood, but potentially for similar cases across the region. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, cheers erupted in the courtroom. Neighbors hugged each other, tears streaming down faces. For many, it was more than a legal victory. It was validation. They had stood up to an organization that had long wielded unchecked power, and they had won. Emma allowed herself a small smile, feeling a mix of relief and pride. This wasn't about money or revenge. It was about proving that even the smallest voices could make a difference when united. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the crowd, eager to capture reactions. Emma stepped forward, flanked by Marcus and several neighbors. Cameras flashed as she spoke firmly, but calmly. "This case isn't just about one tree or one neighborhood," she said. "It's about accountability. Homeowners deserve transparency, respect, and a say in decisions that affect their lives. Today, we showed that no one is above the law." Back in the neighborhood, the fallout from the ruling was immediate. With hefty fines imposed by the court and dwindling membership dues, the HOA found itself unable to operate. Within weeks, the board officially dissolved, leaving behind a vacuum of leadership. But rather than chaos, the community responded with determination. Residents came together to form a new system of governance, one built on fairness, collaboration, and shared responsibility. Emma took the lead in organizing town hall meetings where everyone had a voice. Decisions were made democratically, with votes cast openly and discussions held respectfully. Contractors were chosen based on competitive bids, ensuring fair pricing and quality work. Common areas slowly returned to their former glory as volunteers pitched in alongside hired professionals. Streetlights were repaired, sidewalks patched, and parks revitalized. The transformation was remarkable, breathing new life into the once neglected streets. For Emma, the true victory lay not in the money awarded, but in the spirit of unity that emerged. People who had barely known each other's names now worked side by side, planting flowers, painting fences, and hosting block parties. The sense of community grew stronger with each passing day, filling the void left by the HOA's collapse. Even Richard Langley, humbled by the experience, apologized publicly and moved away shortly after, leaving behind a quieter, kinder neighborhood. Yet, amid all the change, Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness whenever she passed the empty space where the oak tree once stood. Its absence still loomed large, a reminder of what had been lost. Still, she refused to dwell on grief. Instead, she focused on the future, on rebuilding and remembering. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the quiet street, she knelt beside the barren patch of earth and planted a single acorn harvested from the fallen oak. It was a small act, but it carried immense meaning. "This isn't the end," she whispered softly, patting the soil gently. "It's a new beginning." Months turned into years, and the neighborhood transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The dissolution of the old HOA marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter defined not by rules and penalties, but by cooperation and shared purpose. Under the new system Emma helped create, residents took ownership of their community in ways that felt genuine and heartfelt. Decisions were made collectively, with open discussions replacing closed-door meetings. Neighbors who had once been strangers now greeted each other warmly, sharing stories, laughter, and even meals. The acorn Emma planted beside the empty space where the oak tree once stood became a symbol of renewal. At first it was just a tiny sprout, fragile and easy to overlook. But as weeks turned into months, the sapling grew stronger, its leaves unfurling toward the sky. Children in the neighborhood took turns watering it, naming it Little Oak, and checking on it daily. Parents told them stories about the mighty tree that had once shaded their grandparents' picnics and inspired dreams beneath its branches. In time, Little Oak became more than just a plant. It was hope reborn, a living reminder of resilience and perseverance. Emma's efforts didn't stop with the sapling. She spearheaded initiatives to bring greenery back to the neighborhood, organizing tree planting events along streets and in parks. Dozens of volunteers showed up, armed with shovels, gloves, and smiles. Together, they planted maples, elms, and pines, creating a canopy of life that would grow alongside the community. Each tree carried a tag with the name of the family or individual who planted it, turning the act into something personal and meaningful. Slowly but surely, the barren patches left by neglect began to fill with vibrant green. The changes went beyond trees, though. What started as a fight against injustice evolved into a movement for connection. Block parties became a regular occurrence, drawing neighbors out of their homes to share food, music, and laughter. A community garden sprouted in an unused lot, tended by retirees, young parents, and kids alike. Even Richard Langley's old house, now occupied by a friendly couple with 2 toddlers, became a hub of activity. The couple hosted weekend pancake breakfasts, inviting everyone to join in. Emma often found herself reflecting on how far they'd come. The scars of the past, the bitterness, division, and mistrust, had faded, replaced by a sense of belonging. She thought about the day the oak tree fell, how powerless she'd felt watching something so precious destroyed. Yet, looking around now, she realized that loss had sparked something extraordinary. It had awakened a spirit of unity and determination, proving that even in the face of heartbreak, people could rise above and rebuild. One crisp autumn morning, Emma stood near Little Oak, watching golden leaves drift lazily to the ground. Beside her stood Marcus Reed, who had become a close friend over the years. He smiled as he watched children playing nearby, their laughter echoing through the air. "You did good, Emma," he said simply, his voice warm with admiration. She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We did this together," she replied, gesturing toward the bustling neighborhood around them. "It wasn't just me." But Marcus knew better. While many had contributed, Emma's courage and vision had been the catalyst for change. Her fight hadn't just saved the neighborhood from tyranny, it had given it a second chance at life. And as the years passed, her story spread beyond the confines of their street. Local newspapers wrote articles about the woman who stood up to corruption, while advocacy groups invited her to speak at conferences about homeowner rights. Emma never sought recognition, but she embraced the opportunity to inspire others to stand up for what was right. Years later, when Little Oak had grown tall enough to cast its own modest shadow, the neighborhood gathered for a special celebration. Tables laden with food stretched across the park, and colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. At the center of it all stood Emma, holding a plaque engraved with words chosen by the community. "For standing strong, planting roots of justice, and nurturing a brighter future." As she accepted the plaque, tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been beautiful. Through loss and struggle, she had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she had reminded everyone that even the smallest seed, nurtured with care, could grow into something extraordinary. And so, life moved forward, rooted in memories of the past, but reaching ever upward toward the light.